Have you ever wondered what kind of animals are lurking behind your school, your house, or in the field across the street? Well, unfortunately, we don't always get the chance to see these animals, but they leave some footprints behind, which we call tracks, which makes it pretty easy, well, a little bit difficult, but it makes it possible to figure out what kind of animals you have living around you. So, in these photos, you can tell there's some snow on the ground, so what you need in order to track is some good snow or mud or sand, something that would leave a good footprint. Some of the most common animals to find footprints of or tracks of are white-tailed deer, often household pets such as cats or dogs. We often see foxes, cottontail rabbits, squirrels, and if you're lucky, you'll get to see something like a black bear track or even a turkey track. So as you can see, there are many different types of animals living in our forests and many different types of tracks that they can leave behind. So the first track I want to talk about today is the deer track. So many of you, I'm sure, have seen tracks that look like this in the snow or in the mud. And these are the tracks left behind by a deer. As you can see, there are two pieces to each footprint, and those are the split hooves, which are on each of the feet, 4 feet. There's another hoofed animal that might leave a track that looks like this. This belongs to the horse, of course. Alright, and then the next one I have to share is kind of confusing, but once you understand the difference, you probably will never forget it. So, on the left we have a cat footprint, and on the right we have a dog track. In the snow they look pretty similar until you get a little closer, and you notice that the dog will always have its claws out, whereas the cat almost never has the claws out while it is walking. If you have a cat at home, you probably notice that it doesn't always have its claws out, and it sometimes has its claws out, unfortunately, when it's on your lap. So, they have retractable claws, which means that they can pull them in and out. And when they're walking, they don't use them, so their track has no claw print in it. So the dog print can be easily confused with the fox track, and you can use different information to find this out. Typically, fox feet are about 2 inches by 2 inches on the front foot and a little bit smaller in the hind foot. And you can also kind of use different clues to figure out if it's a dog or a fox. For instance, a dog probably wouldn't find shelter in certain areas, and they have different strides and straddles, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so in the next picture, you have, it looks like something hopping through the snow. Now think for a second about what might be hopping through the snow, and I have a feeling you may have guessed one of those. So one of the animals that this type of bounding track belongs to is the rabbit. So this is a video of a rabbit that is not a cottontail, but I wanted to show you some video footage of how a rabbit moves. Now, because of how it moves, it leaves a track like this, which is very similar to another animal that we have around, which is the gray squirrel. In this picture, you can see the difference between the rabbit and the gray squirrel. So the gray squirrel is on the left. You can see that the gray squirrel's back hind feet, which are bigger, land in front of the front feet, which is a little confusing. The front feet are smaller and behind the back feet in the track picture. In the squirrel track, you'll see that they are right next to each other, the front feet. In the rabbit track on the right, you'll notice that the front feet are a little offset from each other, and sometimes the hind feet are too. So that's how you can tell the difference between a squirrel track and a rabbit track. And sometimes when it's in the snow, it's hard to tell, but as you can see in the next picture, this is clearly a rabbit track. since the front feet are slightly offset from each other, which means they're not lined up. Okay, and you can see again another picture of a rabbit track. Here's a series of rabbit tracks. And then the next picture shows the squirrel track. So you can see in the squirrel tracks, the front feet and the back feet are pretty much lined up. And another way you can tell it's a squirrel and not a rabbit is because it's going straight toward this tree. Okay, if tracks end at a tree, you know that it's not a rabbit, since rabbits can't climb trees, but rather it is a squirrel. Okay, so the next few are a little bit harder to find sometimes. These tracks belong to a raccoon. Sometimes you can find these by creeks where there's a lot of mud or snow, because the raccoon needs to go to the creek pretty often to get something to drink and also can get food from these areas. So you can see the raccoon has kind of a little hand as its front feet, and its back foot almost looks like a human foot. It's pretty cute. The next one we have is a skunk. The skunk has an interesting back foot that looks very long and almost kind of like a human baby's foot. It looks different from the raccoon in that the front foot doesn't quite look as much like a hand. It has longer claws, and you'll notice that the claws kind of come out pretty far in front of the pads of the foot. And they have a different walking pattern than the raccoon. Next is something we don't see a whole lot of around here, but something I was very excited to see my first one live this summer. So this is a porcupine, the North American porcupine. And in this video, you kind of get an idea of how the porcupine walks. So the porcupine kind of lumbers back and forth, almost like a big tank. And this is kind of how any type of badger might move. And we don't get to see them walking too much, and you actually don't see them live very often, but what you do get to see is its tracks. So in the next picture, we have kind of a drawing of the porcupine tracks. You can see it kind of drags its feet a little bit, sometimes drags its tail, and you can see that really well in the snow picture. So this snow picture is showing the porcupine tracks. You can see it kind of has a tunnel, so it kind of leaves a tunnel behind it, and you can tell it's a porcupine because its feet are turned in, and it leaves a lot of dragging marks, and it walks kind of like a big badger or tank. Alright, can anyone guess what this next one is? So this next one is a lot bigger than the last ones we've been seeing. You can see it has some claws, and it has pretty large hind feet. These are the tracks of a black bear. So sometimes you might get lucky enough to see the bear, but often you might just get to see its tracks or something else that it left behind. Alright, and the last thing we're going to learn about today are the tracks of different types of birds. So you'll see these tracks kind of, if you think about how the animal is moving, you might guess that it's hopping along, and you're exactly right. So this belongs to a black-capped chickadee. It is a songbird that often perches in trees, and any type of bird that might be eating from your bird feeder will probably be hopping around like this and leave tracks that are right next to each other. In the next picture, you'll see this one looks like it's almost walking, and it's a lot bigger tracks left behind than by the black-capped chickadee. So these are the tracks of a wild turkey, and you'll notice that they kind of put one foot in front of the other, almost like a person walking. So the turkey and any bird that walks on the ground, so like a grouse, a pheasant, and some other types of birds that walk a lot on the ground, they will have footprints that come 1 foot in front of the other. And the last type of bird is just a general type of bird. These kind of tracks would belong to any kind of water bird. So like a duck or a goose would leave behind these tracks. You can see that has webbed feet. So remember that the webbed feet allow it to swim in the water or paddle through the water. And when it leaves its tracks behind in the mud or in the snow, you can kind of see the webbed marks between. And also they turn their feet in. Remember how the porcupine turns its feet in? Well, the Canada goose and ducks often do the same. This last image shows pictures of something that you'll need to know if you learn more about tracking. So the first on the left, it talks about stride. So if you want to try to figure out what kind of animal you're looking at specifically, sometimes in your tracking book it'll talk about the stride and the straddle. So the stride, kind of like our stride, is the distance or the length between the time the animal puts down its 1 foot till the next time it puts down that same foot. So you take the measurement in between those 2 feet, which is the same foot. On the right, there's a picture of the straddle. The straddle, almost like if you're doing a straddle, which is sort of like a split, it's the space between your right foot and your left foot. So in this picture, it would be kind of the width of the tracks. One last thing is that when you go tracking, you definitely want to make sure to bring some kind of a measuring tape or a ruler, and also make sure to bring a tracking guide so that you are more familiar with what kind of tracks the animals leave behind. So I'm hoping that someday we get to go out into the snow and look for the tracks that animals have left behind. And this is something we can do as an entire group. As long as we don't step on the tracks, we can all see the tracks and follow where the animals may have gone. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to tracking, and I hope you get a chance to practice sometime soon. Happy tracking, 2nd grade!